So this is a session with a couple of demos in it. I kind of pitch this at experienced data practitioners. You don't necessarily have any particular technical skills to get a lot out of this today, but you know the more you know about data, the more you know how data works, the better off you'll be. There is some technical demos, as I mentioned. We'll get to those, and there's code that you can grab and look at and try for yourself if you want to. And if you have a question at any point, please feel free to jump in with a question online or drop your if you're here in person, welcome. If you're here in person, we can just wait for a pause and go ahead and ask the question. We've got 2 hours on the schedule, but I just don't think we're going to need that amount of time.
I got one question. I don't know if you can fix it.
Okay, what's that?
The bottom right corner of your projection is fuzzy.
Oh no. Okay, let's see if we can fix that. All right, you're right.
Oh, that's better.
Oh, that's much crisper. Okay. For everybody online, things just got so much better here, you wouldn't even believe it. Okay, so today we're talking about Canadian election data, and there's quite a bit to get through. I don't expect it to take the full time that we have booked for today, but let's get started and see where we go. So the first thing we're going to do today is we're going to walk through some of the basic components of electoral data. All right, we'll talk about the nuts and bolts, who has access to what, and what you can do with it. So the basic unit of democracy in Canada and at the provincial level is the electoral district. That is where you vote, where you live. We all are currently in the electoral district of Windsor West. If you're here at Hackforge online, no idea. So there are 343 electoral districts in Canada, each one with an MP, 124 electoral districts or ridings in Ontario. In Southern Ontario, they are one-to-one coterminous, meaning that a federal electoral district in Windsor is identical in shape to a provincial electoral district in Windsor. In Northern Ontario, that stopped being true a couple of elections ago. There are now different riding boundaries at the federal and provincial level. You should be aware of that, but at least where we are, they're the same shape. The smallest riding in the country is just a little over 26,000 people in Labrador, and the largest riding in Edmonton, Wetaskiwin, is over 200,000 people. Nominally, I think a riding should be around 120,000 population. But of course, there are reasons why an electoral district might be overstuffed or underpopulated, particularly the constitutional requirement for some provinces to have a minimum number of seats, which leaves us with some pretty small electoral districts. And inside electoral districts are polls, okay? Polling divisions are those shapes that you see on the slide that are outlined in gray. The black outlines are the electoral district outlines. That's a little slice of Montreal on the slide. And those gray lines are the polling divisions. So within a polling division, everyone votes at the same place. And then within a polling place, multiple polls are aggregated. Generally, they're polls that are adjacent to one another, that are connected, but not always. In the most recent election in Windsor West, we had some orphan polls that were quite distant from the rest of the polls in that particular polling place. But Elections Canada does their best. You are looking at somewhere between 200 and 300 federal polling divisions per electoral district. In Windsor West, we had roughly 240 polls. And each poll contains, generally speaking, at least in our riding, between 400 and 500 people. Sometimes they can be a little larger, but generally, if they're going to be outside of that size, they're quite a bit smaller. And provincial polls are now quite a bit larger than federal polls. They used to be roughly the same size, a few hundred electors. There are now double-digit polls in a riding in Ontario, which has some pretty unfortunate effects in terms of election analysis, and we'll get into that. And for the most part, finally, people vote in their poll. You vote at your polling location. The exceptions to that would be folks who vote in advance. Go ahead, Lee.
Sorry, I think we can ask questions during this. This
Yeah.
is fascinating. So I'm from the east side of Windsor, and our Liberal incumbent did not win, and I was a bit surprised. But when I looked at it, there was more. I guess the boundary was expanded, I think, which would allow more maybe conservative voters. So I'm guessing that's what sort of like happened then. So I was confused as why the boundary had increased. So it's basically due to like policies to sort of equal out voting areas or boundaries. Is that sort of what I'm understanding?
The redistribution of riding boundaries, and I'm not an expert on this, but the redistribution of riding boundaries is non-political in nature. It's done by a commission, okay, an appointed commission who makes a determination about changes to boundaries. I believe there was a boundary change. We do have a new representation order, which is the term for the sort of definition of riding boundaries and who is represented by whom. The 2023 representation order did change boundaries for some ridings. Windsor West didn't change, but Windsor Tecumseh did. And they can have effects. I don't know. I honestly don't know. I have not looked at Tecumseh poll by poll yet. I will eventually. I haven't looked at it, so I don't have an analysis for you on what happened. But redistribution can change the makeup of the electorate in a riding, and so that can have an impact. I know that that's in Carleton, where Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre lost his seat in the most recent election, changing riding demographics, and I believe that that was due to redistribution, although I could be wrong. It's what I recall, but I seem to recall that that was part of the Conservative narrative around the campaign. And I want to caution you, Lee, and just by extension, everybody else. One of the things that you really have to watch out for when you are working on political data is that politics is about impressions, it's about persuasion, and it's about developing a narrative that convinces and satisfies people, whether or not it lines up one to one with the truth. So you will sometimes hear rationales about data from parties, from campaigns, from individuals. Just keep in mind that many people have a bias and they're going to express that bias as part of their communication about this stuff. So just be careful, right? The numbers don't generally lie, but people do quite a bit. You can all trust me. I'm good. Don't worry about me. Okay, so that's electoral districts and polls. I think that's pretty comprehensive. Any questions on that before I move on? Not seeing any? Great. Okay. So the polling places are pretty hard to figure out, and the polling divisions are pretty hard to figure out from a written description. So we have maps, lots and lots of maps. Digital maps are available, and PDFs are available for download. Generally, there's a detailed format and a sort of summary format for the PDF maps. You can get them from oh, I didn't capitalize the second Canada there. Sorry, Elections Canada. Typically, the election authority offers the authoritative maps for ridings and polling divisions. You can see on the slide what one of those PDF maps would look like. You can also get digital maps, and they're more broadly available. A lot of open data portals publish electoral district and polling division digital maps. What you want to be sure of, and we'll look at this later, but I want to call it out as often as I can. What you want to be sure of is that when you are analyzing the results of an election, that you are working with the right map for that data. The boundaries can change. A lot of data can change between elections, and just because you find a polling division data file online, just got to look and make sure that it represents the data you need for the election that you're analyzing. I got the polling division data that we're going to look at today. I got it from the Canada open data site. I believe Elections Canada, Elections Ontario will just send you to the to that open data site, but there are other sources as well. Lots of formats for this data. I use the Esri shapefile format because it's well understood by me and it's easy to work with using QGIS. That's the software I recommend that you use to work with map data on your desktop. QGIS.org is where you'll find the website and the downloads and all that good stuff. I believe that there's also GDB, which is another Esri format. That's geodatabases. You can also get a GDB file, and there's some form of, I want to say, KML that you could use if you were going to be imposing writing and pole boundaries onto Google Maps. But we use shapefiles. I use shapefiles partly just because it's the format I'm familiar with, but also they work really well. So that's what I'll be demoing tonight. Okay, so we mentioned polls. We've talked about polls and electoral districts. Results on the day are people vote in their polls, and then results are reported by poll. Okay, if you vote in advance, either by special ballot or at the advance polls, you are not counted in your poll on election day. You are counted separately. Okay, and those I've taken part in advance votes. I've never seen a special ballot count. I'm not sure if they count them at the same time as advance or if they do it separately, but those are counted at the returning office centrally rather than counted in the polling place. We're going to come back to this, but there's a couple of things that's important to know. Data that campaigns have access to, okay? On election day, campaigns are entitled to know who has voted that day, okay? They're entitled to know who has voted in advance on the day of advance polls, and they're entitled to know who has voted on the day on election day. Now, the reason that is allowed is so that campaigns can be effective in their work, okay? And we'll talk a little bit about the work of campaigns a bit later, but it is good to know that who has voted. It's what happens is campaign workers are able to attend the various polling locations throughout a riding. And when they do that, they bring a credential and they sign in and they attest an oath when they get to the polling place, and that gives them certain privileges. And one of those privileges is to pick up what are called in elections bubble sheets. Okay, at least that's the terminology that I've seen used. They don't actually look like bubble sheets anymore, but they're still called that. That's what politicos around here call them anyway. And what they are is a list of sequence numbers. So each person in the poll is assigned a sequence number. I've never seen a one, but I've seen single digits. So starting at one and then going all the way up to the presumably to the number of electors. Think of it as the primary key for the poll. So those sequence numbers are provided every hour. You can pick up a sheet of paper that has a list of all the sequence numbers of people who voted and the poll that they voted in. And then you take that paper, and campaigns then are able to identify who that individual is, who they are, and where they live, and strike them off their list. And campaigns are also entitled to monitor the vote at every polling place. So today is a special day in Canadian politics. We have a recount happening in our city. There is a recount happening in the riding of Windsor-Tecumseh. So this is happening now, presumably. Each campaign can send a scrutineer to every single poll if they want to and if they have the resources. And that scrutineer is able to monitor the hand count. So at the end of the night, the ballot boxes are opened, the ballots are removed, and the worker counts them physically in front of any scrutineers who happen to be there, who are authorized to be there. And so that is the first sort of line of defense for campaigns and for the electorate in terms of ensuring that we have a fair count. Those sealed ballot boxes are opened, and everyone can see and watch that ballot box be opened, and then they can watch the ballots one by one be unfolded and counted. So that's kind of what happens on election day. There's some other data not totally related to the actual process of voting that's important to talk about. Campaign finance data. There is detailed finance data available to you. I've got a list on the slide, a whole bunch of information about how campaigns spent money, the money that they raised, money they borrowed, et cetera, et cetera. You can get that as a single return for each candidate in each riding in every election, assuming that the candidate is compliant and files a return. And some of it is available as an aggregate, okay? There is a pretty big data set of contributions to parties and candidates. It's over 3 gig, and that is every contribution made at the federal level since 2020. They have tranches of years, and presumably it's when the download gets too big, they kind of cut it off and give you another set of years. And if you're interested in that, I know that is a really ugly URL, but you can kind of see if you look at it a little bit, you can kind of see how Elections Canada constructs the URLs on their site, and that is the finance section. It's the main page of the finance section on the Elections Canada website. You can get access to all of this data. It's really interesting stuff. And anytime you see a news story in the media about some scandalous donation or scandalous election expense, it's coming out of this data. Okay. So there are some challenges with electoral data, and I want to cover them all. So we've talked a little bit about the redistribution of geography. Now, because the electoral district is the basic unit of democracy in Canada, when we redistribute ridings, sometimes we create new ones, sometimes they are renamed. That can create a challenge, especially in analyzing results from election to election. So that's something to consider. Also, poll geography changes. Now that is far more frequent than riding geography changing, and it's something that you have to watch out for. The geography of the individual polls, from my observations, I've never talked to anybody at Elections Canada about this, but from my observations, it appears to me that they don't like to change the boundaries too much. The boundaries tend to be pretty static. Where you voted last time is probably where you're going to vote again next time. But populations aren't static. People move around. Ridings grow, ridings shrink, polls grow and shrink. So with changing population, sometimes then a poll has to be split, or the borders have to be redrawn so that the population is as even as it can be. Okay, so that happens, not every time, but it does happen. And we definitely saw quite a bit of small, minor geography changes in, just a few people in the waiting room here, small minor geography changes in the polls in the most recent election in 2025, presumably because there has been so much population change in Windsor that's the reason. Even more annoying than changing poll geography, because that does tend to be pretty minor. It's difficult to get poll maps early in a campaign. And especially if you start early and you're working before the RIT drops, you're likely to not have access to the new poll maps, the new poll numbers. So there is a common phenomenon that you'll see where you have two sets of identifiers for your data, okay? You have the old polls and the current polls. And even in some partisan databases, I only have access to one, but even in some partisan databases, you'll see that on an individual's record, they will show the previous polling location or the previous poll identifier as well as the current one. And it's something to really, if you do decide to get involved in a campaign or you are analyzing data during an election, it's really important to realize that you're working with multiple sets of identifiers and that those identifiers can be renumbered between elections, and the poll number in 2019 doesn't necessarily have to have any relation to the poll number in 2021. So that is a major problem, I would say, in doing superficial analysis of election data. It makes it hard to compare data at more granularly than at the riding between elections. Okay, you're going to need to use some tooling beyond just your spreadsheet and your calculator in order to solve that problem. And the last problem that I want to mention is that the complete financial returns, to my knowledge, and if anybody does know, I think this video is going to be on YouTube. So if you're watching this on YouTube and you know that there is a place where you can download structured data files of financial returns in Canada, please get in touch because I would really like to know. But to the best of my knowledge, they're not available. So you can get structured data about donations. But if you want to know about the financial returns and more details about the spending of a campaign, then you're actually going to have to look at the individual campaign returns that are filed one by one, redrawn so that the population is as even as it can be. Okay, so that happens, not every time, but it does happen. And we definitely saw quite a bit of small minor geography changes in, just a few people in the waiting room here, small minor geography changes in the polls in the most recent election in 2025, presumably because there has been so much population change in Windsor that's the reason. Even more annoying than changing poll geography, because that does tend to be pretty minor. It's difficult to get poll maps early in a campaign. And especially if you start early and you're working before the RIT drops, you're likely to not have access to the new poll maps, the new poll numbers. So there is a common phenomenon that you'll see where you have two sets of identifiers for your data, okay? You have the old polls and the current polls. And even in some partisan databases, I only have access to one, but even in some partisan databases, you'll see that on an individual's record, they will show the previous polling location or the previous poll identifier as well as the current one. And it's something to really, if you do decide to get involved in a campaign or you are analyzing data during an election, it's really important to realize that you're working with multiple sets of identifiers and that those identifiers can be renumbered between elections, and the poll number in 2019 doesn't necessarily have to have any relation to the poll number in 2021. So that is a major problem, I would say, in doing superficial analysis of election data. It makes it hard to compare data at more granularly than at the riding between elections. Okay, you're going to need to use some tooling beyond just your spreadsheet and your calculator in order to solve that problem. And the last problem that I want to mention is that the complete financial returns, to my knowledge, and if anybody does know, I think this video is going to be on YouTube. So if you're watching this on YouTube, and you know that there is a place where you can download structured data files of financial returns in Canada, please get in touch because I would really like to know. But to the best of my knowledge, they're not available. So you can get structured data about donations. But if you want to know about the financial returns and more details about the spending of a campaign, then you're actually going to have to look at the individual campaign returns that are filed one by one. Okay. Okay. So just some things to think about what you can and can't do with this data. Some people can identify the individuals who voted. Okay. Everyone can determine voter turnout at the poll level and the votes by candidate at the poll level. You cannot determine how any person voted. Voting is private. Ballots don't have any identifying information on them. So there is no way to know with certainty who someone voted for unless they tell you and you trust them. So campaigns try to fill this gap in different ways, and we'll talk about the data that campaigns collect and the ways that they try to model electors to better understand how people might vote and what might motivate people. You also can't compare results between elections with precision at a finer grain than the riding for all the reasons that I've stated, unless you're ready to do a real big pile of manual work. But if we're willing to relax our precision a little bit, then there is a technique that we can use to get good data, and especially when we look at how those changes actually shake out in practice on the ground, I think you'll see that that approximation of the truth is more than useful. And again, can identify turnout trends more granularly than at the riding level, and for the same reason, because it's just so tricky to work across campaigns or across elections, sorry, with the Elections Canada data. Okay, those are the limits. And a couple of friends of mine who are involved in politics, you'll see on this slide, Jessica Sartori, a special friend of mine, and Kristen Siapas, who was a candidate in Ward 4 here in Windsor in the 2022 municipal election. Just wanted to shout out those two, well, since you're looking at their pictures. And so let's talk about the data that parties, campaigns, and pollsters can collect. So there's demographic data is really important in Canadian politics. The demography of the electorate is a tool that is used by parties, by pollsters, in order to model potential voter behavior, in order to understand what might happen. And one of the tools that is used to do that is demographic data, either the raw data from Statistics Canada or processed data from data vendors like Environics Analytics, who will sell you a data set that is derived primarily from the census that Statistics Canada does, but also consumes data from a lot of other public and commercial data sets. They do a lot of work on that, and then out the other end pops out sort of a demographic analysis of any particular person based on factors like where they live, how old they are, et cetera, et cetera. And you can see this data in action. Now, this is a tip that I give to canvassers when they are walking out. There is a website where Environics summarizes their demographic data at the level of the postal code. So you can pull up you want to Google in Environics Prism, PRIZM, and they'll give you the URL to the Prism website. You can plug in your own postal code, and you'll get a little demographic picture of what Environics thinks your neighborhood is all about, and what your your neighborhood looks like, and they break it up into a few dozen different sort of segments of society with catchy names. My neighborhood, Environics describes my neighborhood as Boomer Bliss. So, for whatever reason, I don't know that that's totally applicable to me as an individual, but when I walk around my neighborhood, I think they got it pretty much right. Um, Beyond demographic data, and by the way, that is some of the data that parties use to fill that gap. You know, we can't ever find out who voted for sure, but you can make a pretty solid guess about what direction someone might lean. And so you combine actual turnout data, and we at least partially, parties and campaigns have access to one-to-one turnout data, in that if they attended those polling places and picked up that paper, or loaded a subsequent data release from Elections Canada or Elections Ontario, they're able to know with precision who voted. So you take a list of folks who voted and you apply a demographic analysis to them. There's a lot of value there. These are the things that parties and campaigns do to try to figure out who to talk to and what to say. Okay, one of the major things that a campaign does, any election campaign, is voter identification. They want to know who their potential voters are. And so there is a whole lot of activity that goes into collecting that data in a campaign. It's one of the major activities of any political campaign, but it all starts with the voter list. Campaigns are entitled to a list of the names and addresses of every registered voter, every citizen, every person who is eligible to vote in that riding. There are different voter lists for municipal elections. It's generally the same principle, although municipal voter lists are less accurate in my experience, far less accurate than the federal or provincial voter list. So generally speaking, those lists are provided to registered candidates once they have, once they've filled out all their paperwork and got their signatures and registered with Elections Canada. Part of the package that they get is a list of all the voters in the riding. So with that list, they do all the other things that you see listed there on the slide under voter identification. They canvass door to door. They knock on doors and talk to people and try to determine who those folks are likely to support in the election. They call people on the telephone and ask them the same questions. Some campaigns send text messages. You may have gotten a text message from a head of state or a leader of the opposition during the campaign. I got several. I'm never as popular with people like Mark Carney and Pierre Poilievre as I am during the writ. I'm not sure why that is. IVR robocalls. So we all are familiar with robocalls. There are a couple different kinds. There's the kind where a message just gets kind of spewed out to you when you pick up the phone, but there's also interactive ones, and that's what an IVR call is. You are prompted to respond to questions over the phone. You can punch it in on your answers on the phone, and that all gets calculated and tallied. Typically, those kind of robocalls are done by campaigns. Sometimes they're done by third parties who are interested in determining who might win or influencing the outcome. Sometimes you can use social media for voter identification, although that's a little trickier. I've done this before, and I've done it and in some campaigns and then not done it later because I'm not sure the juice is worth the squeeze. There's a lot of anonymity and fake IDs and bots on social media, and it can be pretty tough to be sure that person X who liked, shared, or commented on your post actually is a human who lives in your riding and therefore who you care about. But you can do some things with social media, and it does count as voter identification. One of the sneakier ways that parties and campaigns will try to harvest voter data is through petitions. So if you ever see a petition on any subject that is sponsored by a political party, go ahead and sign it if you want to, but keep in mind that that party is going to use that data for other purposes. They're probably going to call you later and ask for money or ask for your vote. Um, and finally, signs. So the sign requests are part of the canvas. They are part of the phone canvas. Also, sometimes you'll have a sign form on your website or on your social media where people can register, and people do make a call and register and ask for a sign themselves. So it's nice when people volunteer. That saves the shoe leather and saves the time of having to go and engage them individually. Um, but the other way that signs are used for voter identification is by other parties, right? You can make an inference about at least one resident of a home or an owner of a property when you see an election sign on the lawn. So it's not hard data; it's information. But you will see campaigns look at that, or you will see that information be discussed. Okay, parties and campaigns also have access to volunteer and donor data, of course, their own volunteers who have registered and their own donors who they have to track legally. Go ahead, Lee.
Hmm. So I'm just interested in the topic of like the signs. Is there
Yeah.
any data or data? Because I'm wondering if there's ever any data out there that would be having access to all the political signs for a particular election in a riding. Um,
What a great idea. The only way that you would be able to get that would be to request it from campaigns. And so you'd have to go to every campaign that was active in a riding and ask them, can I have your sign data? And they're all going to tell you no, Lee. But, that's a neat idea. It would be neat to try some crowdsourced data collection. Signs are public, right? So
Mhm.
they're visible in public. Anybody walking or driving by could see them. A drone could even maybe register a lawn sign. So there's a possibility that you could do a survey for signs and get some data out of that. But that's the only way that I'm aware of that you could actually collect that information. It would be really neat if anybody finds a data set about election signs. I'd be really interested in seeing it.
Aren't, sorry,
Oh, go ahead.
yeah, aren't political parties, public bodies technically, as a result, it's a right of information?
So, political parties in Canada are, I believe, they're private corporations. And though they act in a public manner, like they work through a public process, right? The public election process, but that's owned by Elections Canada. And you don't need any particular qualifications to be a candidate or even a party. It's basically a popularity contest. If you can get enough people to sign a piece of paper, you are a candidate. If you can get some multiple of that number to sign a piece of paper, you can create your own political party. And when you do that, then you are authorized to do all those things, right? But the parties are private, and you can't do like an FOI, like a Freedom of Information request. You can't do that on a political party. Yeah, it's an interesting question though. Um, Lee, did you re-raise your hand? Go ahead.
I just want to piggyback off that. I'm kind of curious since you mentioned it as well as I've signed a couple of petitions, but in my mind, it feels like anybody could just make signatures up as bullshit, right? Just to like for a recount or something, right? Like do they usually check those things?
Um, so I'm not sure what exactly you're asking. So there's a few different kinds of petition. I'm
Let me
talking.
rephrase.
Yeah, go
Also, let
ahead.
me rephrase it. Sorry, just we mentioned if you get enough people to sign, right? And I can picture you could probably easily fake a bunch of it, right? Well, I don't know actually. I never thought. I'm just wondering about that.
I've never created a petition. I think there is some kind of verification involved because, or there can be, because one of the ways that you can discredit a petition or get it invalidated is by identifying false information that's on that. Um, Definitely when you need to get signatures for other things in a campaign, they are verified. For example, when you need to register as a candidate and you need, the signature of so many people who reside in the riding, that's information that can be checked. But To my knowledge, there's not like, any sort of centralized way that petitions are policed. Online petitions would be a completely different thing. Generally speaking, it's like an email address that might be what is unique, and that's what the parties want from you. They want your contact information so that they can reach back out to you. But yeah, to my knowledge, like I don't know what it takes to have like for a signature to count on like an official petition. So you mentioned recall. So I think you're talking about petitions that end up in being sort of presented in Parliament as part of the business of the House of Commons. And I don't know the details of how those petitions like are how they get started or what counts as a valid signature and how they're vetted. I don't have that information, but I'd be really interested if you do some research and find out. Let me know, Lee.
Thanks for
Um,
that, Doug.
yeah, no worries. And finally, I wanted to mention aggregate voter intention. So pollsters they can do phone surveys, they can do online panels, they can run focus groups where they get a group of people into a room and talk to them. There are all kinds of ways that they do this, and what they're trying to do is gauge the intention of likely voters to vote one particular way or another, and that is not directly election data, but it certainly influences people's vote. It certainly influences the outcome of the election. So I thought it was important to mention it. And this is an opportunity too, I think, to talk a little bit about riding level projections. You may be familiar with the projections that are put out by some people. 338 Canada is one of the more famous ones. And 338, what they do is they take all of the polls, or at least a basket of polls, and they aggregate those polls, feed them through some kind of a mathematical model that takes, not only the polling information, but previous polls and past election results, and I'm sure other things into account. And then that model produces a prediction for the outcome of the election. And one thing that since I first saw these in 2015, one thing that has become increasingly part of the conversation in every election in the ridings is conversation about the 338 projection. And we had some other projections this time. There was one that was aimed at strategic voting that you would see a lot of. And I think it's really important to think about what these things are. I mentioned a few minutes ago that misinformation and disinformation and motivated reasoning are all part of the stock in trade of campaigns and political parties. And so one of the things that you have to really watch out for is numbers being misrepresented. One of the ways that people misrepresent numbers is they will show you a number that is accurate and valid, but they will say that it's something other than it is. And so people will often talk about riding projections like they're a poll, but they are not a poll. Okay. The riding projection is an estimate for a particular riding that takes into account national and regional polls and then applies a number of factors. And it was really interesting to observe the limits of that stuff in the most recent election in Windsor West. So now the campaign is over. We know how it turned out. Brian Massey came in third, got about 27% of the vote, 26, I think, point something. But if you were following the 338 projection throughout the election, Brian Massey never fell below first place in the projection. He was always projected to have either the most or tied for the most vote share. And the reason that is, even though the polls were calling for an NDP collapse across the country, which is what happened, that projection was giving Brian Massey in Windsor West an incumbency advantage. And apparently, the advantage that you get from having won the last 6 elections in a row in a riding is pretty overpowering, because the incumbency advantage inflated the projection for the NDP. So even though they came in third in our riding, they were always projected to come in first throughout the entire course of the campaign. So it's really important. I wanted to take the what's that?
That seems like a very undesirable bias in your projections. Like you have the polling data, like you can just ask people who are you going to vote for. Why would you just say, okay, well, everybody says they want liberals and conservatives, but we'll just assume that 20% more want NDP. Like why?
Well, because there is no riding poll, right? Remember, Canada's elections are crazy, right? Every riding is its own election. And then those elections aggregate to make up the answer of who's going to run the country. But the question everybody wants answered is who's going to run the country. So polls pure voter intention on a national level or even a provincial level doesn't really tell you who's going to run the country. So that's where the modeling comes in. And at the level of at the bigger picture level, modeling individual riding races in the way that they do tends to give them more accurate projections of the overall result, right? Because what they're doing is they're simulating all these riding races, and then that's identifying for that projection how many seats get allocated to each party. So it's a very useful tool. It's just that those riding level projections, when they're published, and I think they're published without perhaps enough explanation, like I just don't think the general public doesn't understand them. When they're published without, like on the riding level, I think that they tend to create a lot of very uninformative conversation, a lot of chatter about them that's not really going anywhere because it's not hard data. So so I tend to agree with you. Like I think they're of very limited value at the riding level. But
it strikes me as odd. Like if you're getting your information from like robocalls and phone canvas and text messages and door to door, like in all those cases you have the riding of the voter.
yes.
So you should be able to just have the data with the ridings attached to all the votes.
Right, but that's data that's collected by campaigns, and they're not sharing, right? They're not sharing. So campaigns will identify all kinds of voters. But the other thing, Alan, that I think is interesting about that is that you are not sampling a neutral, like you're not sampling a representative sample of the electorate in a riding when you canvass. What you're sampling is where you think the most people that will support you are. That's where you want to go first. Because although we vote in our individual polls and results get reported in individual polls, what matters is the overall number in the riding. So if you can go and fish where the fish are and get, identify, I don't know, let's take an arbitrary number. If you can identify 100 people in a particular poll in one day, and if you went and canvassed another poll that day, you might only get 50 because there are fewer of your supporters there, you're going to go where the 100 votes are. So your information as a campaign, it's really weird because what almost always happens is, and of course we measure the ID rate. We measure the rate at which people are self-identifying as supporting your party versus any other party. But what happens is that rate starts around the highest it's going to get, and then it declines because you're fishing in more and more dilute pools.
Yeah.
What I think, but I think you can detect. You can detect things through those numbers, but they are worse than a riding projection in terms of like trying to get some instrumentation on what the result is going to be. But what I think you can detect is momentum. Very clearly, you can detect momentum, but that's just a proxy for what people are hearing at the doors. Because if you actually want to know what is happening in a campaign and what direction that's likely to go and talk to 100 voters. Go knock on 100 doors and talk to people, and you'll get a really good understanding of where the mood is and how people are feeling.
But again, wouldn't that be like the same problems, all the sampling biases creep in where, you knock on a whole 100 doors But again, they could all be homogeneous populations, so you
Yeah.
would be just
Right. Exactly right. And especially because there is so much pre-analysis done now by political parties. They are already segmenting the electorate before your campaign starts, right? I've heard people say that the conservatives have like a score, and I don't know. I think I've heard that it's out of 5, but I actually don't know anything about how conservative data works, so I'm comfortable talking about it. But I think that each household or individual gets a score out of 5 and 5 would be how conservative you are and how likely you are to vote, right? So 5 would be your best and a 1 or a 0 would be the worst, right?
all we need to do is call up the Chinese Communist Party and they'll give you a social index.
Well, something like that, right? Something a lot like that. So those kind of tools are used to try to predict, but you're absolutely right. It's full of bias. And I think you have to, and this is an uncomfortable thing for data practitioners like us, but I think when you're campaigning, you have to be kind of bifurcated. You have to be thinking about the numbers and you have to be thinking about the data, but you also have to live in the land of vibes where all the other political actors are living. And you have to think about the power of stories and think about the conversations that you have and reflect on them. All that stuff is as valuable as data when it comes to campaigning. Okay. Oh, I got another Lee question. Go for it, Lee.
So this would probably be an anti-data question, if I can use that term. Has there been a movement or conversation around not having data around polling projections? Because I find it very influencing, right? Like sometimes if I feel like I lived in many different ridings throughout my life, and there's a blowout sometimes, I know ahead of time, it actually sometimes makes me not want to vote if I'm really busy. Because again, it has to change how people are going to do, right? Obviously, strategic voting.
So I think there has been, like, you hear about that. I don't know that there's been any really serious conversation about it. I would assume it would run up against the Charter of Rights and Freedoms if you tried to control for that, publishing that kind of information. But also all of that stuff is more information, right? And I think like I object to writing projections not because I don't think they should be published or that I think they're bad data. I just think that they should be better understood by the population, right? And there should be some more pains taken to communicate what they are frankly by everybody in politics because this is this new artifact we have in elections that I don't think is fully explained. But I think it's better to have them than to not have them. If you understand the instrument and you're comfortable with it, it's better to have more data than less, right, Lee?
Just to ride on his coattails. Lee, thank you for that cue. Now I'm just talking from my personal experience.
Yep.
I was born in a country which has a very similar constitutional framework which Canada has, and it's not a secret. I was born in India, so there it's exit polls are banned till the day polling closes. So, from a freedom of speech perspective,
it can happen.
Yeah.
We have restrictions on speech around elections.
Yeah.
Political advertising is banned on election day. Right.
So there is a cooling period, probably like 48 hours before everybody goes to polls. Campaign stops. You can't have. So people find what you call as pseudo ads or odd ads to pass the message. But yeah, 48 hours active campaigning needs to stop. Then the populace goes to elections. The day elections close, India's a large country, so obviously elections happen over a stage, not as one day. So it happens over a stage after the whole elections are closed. After the last poll is polled, exit polls come out. So
that's very interesting.
Yeah, so it's a very interesting dynamic from the freedom. So when I say from the, colored the thing statement of freedom of speech. So probably, right. There's no curtailment because few people did go to the Supreme Court in India, asking that exit polls should be allowed during the polling has happened. And it was allowed at one point in time. And there was political parties created a bottle law which said that it influences polling because they showed it was statistical data that there was an influence of polling with exit polls coming in. Some people just gave up and say, hey, anyway, he's going to win. I'm not
Right.
going to vote.
Mm-hmm.
So interesting.
Yeah, that's definitely an issue. Yeah, in BC, people are like, well, why should I vote? The Liberals have already won.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, it's lost causes, right?
Yeah. Because, well, this time BC got to decide a lot, right? They got to
Yes.
decide whether the Liberals had a majority or not. They decided not. Okay. I want to move on because we're going to get to the demos pretty soon. Okay, so poll by poll results come back from Elections Canada or Elections Ontario. I've got some screenshot of an official return there, but you can get them in digital format from Elections Canada in two ways. Okay, format one is really good for analyzing in Excel. It gives you sort of well, it looks just like this. It gives you a column for every candidate. And the number of votes at each candidate is broken out, and because they're all in the same row, it's easy to do those operations that you might want to do to aggregate them, to compare them, etc. Format two is better for database loading because it is one row per candidate per poll. So you don't have that summarized information, but it's also a lot easier to take those records and load them up into the database of your choice. So those two formats are available. Okay, so what we're going to do first, our first demo, I'm going to very quickly show you how we can visualize election results using QGIS. So these are the steps that we have to take. I happen to have a CSV of election results loaded up in Microsoft Excel. So we can go ahead and pop that up, and here we go. This looks to me, based on the candidates, Quinn, Hunt, and Henry Lau, this has to be 2019. So what you're looking at here is this is the format one. And so you're looking at the ED number 35117 for Windsor West, although it's now 35119. We got a couple more ridings in Ontario that are come before Windsor in the alphabet. The polling station number, the name of the polling station, then each candidate's vote in that poll, the number of ballots rejected in that poll. So these are spoiled ballots, ballots that were marked incorrectly or left blank or something else happened to them. And we get a total number of votes cast and a total number of electors. So we can easily add, whoops, how about I spell it right? We can add a turnout column, pretty easy. We can just oh no. Try to do a formula quick and look what happens. Let's try that again. There we go.
Hey Doug, all we see on the screen is your
oh, you guys are not seeing it? Oh, shoot. Yeah. Thank you, Fraser. That is, let's try. How's that? Is that better?
Yeah, see a spreadsheet.
Okay, great. So there we go. I've added this column to identify turnout. Now we can save this, although we can also do this calculation in QGIS, but you may want to do the analysis in Excel rather than do it in the visualization tool because you may want to use these numbers for something else. But we'll do it both ways. So now that Fraser gave me that information, I am going to have to just, here we go, share my whole screen. Okay, what could go wrong? And now I will show you guys QGIS. You see in QGIS now? Yes?
Yep.
Okay, great. All right. So I'm not going to give you the full QGIS tour, but I will just quickly say that, again, qgis.org is where you download it. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be adding a couple of layers to this map, okay? So on the layer menu, I'm going to first add a vector layer, okay? And from here, we are going to pick our downloads. And yes, that was a Windows XP search pack I downloaded. And there we are. There is the 2019 polling divisions shape file. So when we add this to the map, okay, the first thing that happens is that the data I'm importing does not match the projection that I'm working with in QGIS, because I'm working with latitude and longitude, and Statistics Canada uses the Statistics Canada Lambert coordinate reference system. And so I'm going to reproject the map. Great. And so now what you see is a map of the whole country broken down into individual polling divisions. Okay. And you can see that that's a little bit too fine detail to see at the level of the country. So what we can do is we can right click on our newly added layer and we scroll down to the filter command, okay? And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to filter it on the federal number field, okay? And we already talked about 35117, that's Windsor West. So if I filter on 35117, my map of Canada goes away, and I get instead a map of Windsor broken down into its polling divisions. So there are the polls in Windsor, Windsor West. I'm going to add another layer, and this will be a delimited text layer, okay? And that's a CSV. And we're going to add, I'm going to go back to our downloads. And polling, here we go, poll by poll, there is one. Let's make sure this is the one I'm expecting. Henry Lau, yep, okay. So CSV, it doesn't have any geometry in it, okay? You can add a CSV that contains X and Y coordinates if you're bringing some points into your data or whatnot. But in this case, we are bringing in only attributes because we're going to join it to an existing layer. Okay, we've added that data, we've added that layer. Nothing changes on the screen because it's not a layer with geometry. But what we can now do is jump into the properties of our polling division layer. We can go down to joins and add a join. Okay, there's only one layer, so it's got that right. Electoral district number is what we want, and we want to match that with, oh no, I'm sorry, polling station number with PD num. That's what we want to do. On the very far left of the field descriptor, you see there is a little indicator, a little icon that indicates the data type. In this case, they're both numeric data, so they should work for a join. Okay, click OK, click Apply, click OK, and now let's take a look at our attribute table to see if those additional columns exist. So here's the data that comes with the map, and then there's our extra data. Okay, so there's our votes for Daryl, votes for Quinn, Henry, et cetera, et cetera. So there's all our votes. Great. So now we have access to all this data on our map. So we can take that data, and you can do this with anything, but of course we're working with it in terms of our election results. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into symbology, and we're going to change the symbology from a single symbol to graduated. Okay, and then you can use the value of a single field, or you can do a formula, which is what we're going to do. I do want to show you that, and we're going to get voter turnout. Okay, so we're going to get total votes, and we're going to divide that by electors. There we go. Okay, click OK. Then we need to classify our data. So we are going to have a limited number of colors appearing on the map. That's the number you see over here on the right. It's right now 5 classes. Sure, that's fine. And there are a bunch of different ways that you can break things into their 5 classes. For our purposes, let's go with equal count and classify. That's very important. So now our map has been classified. We click OK, and there you go. There is a color-coded map that is showing turnout, relative turnout in 5 categories across the riding. You can do the same thing with obviously results for any one candidate, or you can come up with your own formula. But this is a pretty basic task in campaigning. Where are the voters? Where is turnout high? So that's what I demonstrated. Okay, back to our slides. Okay. All right. Okay. So I've talked a lot about how resistant election results are in Canada and Ontario to comparison between elections for a number of reasons. But there are some things that work in our favor. Most of the geography of polls don't change very much. So we can do a little bit of math to identify overlapping geographies and then just determine the relative area of what was the poll last time and how much of that is in poll X this time. So this was the most interesting item on the first page of Google results for searching for non-hierarchical geography. And this is an interesting map of regional groupings in Northern Ireland and Ireland proper. So that's pretty interesting. Anyway, so what we can do is we can use the degree of overlap to determine how we should distribute our results for comparing so that we're comparing apples to apples. So if poll 100 had all these people in it last time, and this time we've got poll 101 and it's got 95% of poll 100, then we can say we can take a 95% number of the vote of that particular result and apply it to our new poll, aggregated with whatever the remaining 5%, whatever the result was in the corresponding other poll the last time. So this is far from perfect because humans are not evenly distributed across geography, right? We don't have a uniform distribution of people, so it's a little tricky to do this. But I don't know that there is another way, and it gets us closer, I think, to an accurate result. And anyway, I use it like this. So I use that technique to compare results between elections. So before we get into the demo on that, though, I want to talk to you a little bit about map projections and coordinate reference systems. So the normal web map projection is the 3857. It is the also known as WGS 84. That's latitude and longitude, and it's a Mercator projection. Okay, so that is very not good if you're going to be doing any kind of calculation of area, because you're going to get quite a distorted picture. So there are projections available for specific geographies. 32617 is the zone 17N. And if you look at the screenshot there that I grabbed from epsg.io, there's a descriptor there that identifies the exact area where it's appropriate to use this projection. And then what you get is far more accurate rendering of geography. So the city of Windsor, if you look on the open data page, you will find that most of the maps are provided in 2 projections. One is the standard latitude and longitude, accurate to 2 meters or something like that. And then the other is, I believe this one, the very same projection we're using here, and for the very same reason. If you are going to use a map to determine exactly where a sewer line is buried underground, you want that map to be as accurate as possible so that when people go digging, they dig in the right spot. Okay, just a little sidebar on map projections. And so I'm going to do a little demo for you of how we can compare results across elections. So the first thing I wanted to show you though is the image on the slide. So this is a great image, which is the vote shift between 2021 and 2025. So color-coded look at the change in votes. So this is done at the riding level. We've talked about this already. That's where you're going to get the most accurate information is at the riding level. But if we wanted to make a map like this for every poll in the city, then we're going to have to resort to the techniques that I described. So the steps to do this, we are going to load the shape file, okay, in QGIS. We've already done that. Filter out the electoral district we're interested in. Okay, we've done that. And then I'll show you how to export the layer as GeoJSON, and then we're going to generate some concordance files for it. So I believe this is my last slide, so we can leave the slides behind. I hope you guys liked them. And there's a couple things on my desktop I want to show you. So first of all, there are a few GitHub repos that I want you to note. This one, the one we're about to look at, is called PD Concordance. It's on my GitHub repository, or it's on my GitHub page. And it's something I vibe coded yesterday for this demo. So you'll see it in a couple of minutes. Some other repos that might be of interest. I put together a database. This was an SSIS project I did a few years ago to load up 2015 and 2019 data results into a Microsoft SQL database. So I have updated that with 2021 data as well. The data file is there in the repository. So if you're interested in data down to the poll for election years 2015, 2019, and 2021, it's there. You can, of course, reuse this same tool to add 2025 data once it's available. I may do that and update the repository, but I think that's a pretty useful resource if you want to do some visualizations of election results or just look at them, or query them. So that is available. I wanted to mention that. And there is also this tool called Ontario Poll Concordance, which takes a little bit of a simpler approach to aggregating census data to the level of the Ontario poll. Now, remember, I mentioned that Ontario polls are now massive, right? They've resized them so that there's 30 or 40 polls in a riding instead of 200. So with that in mind, what we do here is we just take the overlapping geographies and aggregate them, aggregate the census data there. So it's an older tool. It's something that I did before I hit on the technique that I'm going to demo now. But you may want to look at it and look at how we load the data and look at how we aggregate it. So those are there. Those are the 3 election-related repositories that I have. So exporting a data file from QGIS. We're going to export this layer. Okay. We hit Save Features As. We don't want CSV though. We want GeoJSON. Okay. Give it a file name. Go. Okay. And then the CRS. So I don't want Stats Canada Lambert. I want our default WGS84 because I want latitude and longitude in my output. Okay. And I think I'm not actually going to use this file, so I'll just go ahead and click it. So, okay, now that's exported, and you can see that the layer that you've just created, it also gets added to the map, and you can see that there is one-to-one. Whoops, I clicked where I shouldn't have. But if I turn that layer off and on, you can see that those geometries are identical. Did it again. Okay, and now we're going to leave QGIS behind. Okay, and what I'm going to show you is the code for this concordance tool. So it's got two scripts in it. I did create a Docker file for it so that we can, I don't like to run Python scripts on my desktop. Like I don't like to run them locally. I find Python to be very messy in terms of trying to run multiple environments and on a machine and run keep all those libraries and dependencies together. So I use Docker so that every project has its own container and I don't have to think about that. The libraries we're using are GeoPandas and Pandas. Okay, that's the libraries that we're using in Python. And I've got two scripts here. Okay, so what PD concordance does is it does it the simple way, and it basically is looking for the overlapping poles, and it's just basically telling you which is the pole that matches more than 99% with the geometry of the pole in the corresponding pole in the other data file. So why would you use this one? Geometry doesn't change in every election. Sometimes poles just get renumbered or the geometry changes are minor. And if you just want a simple, like you would use this for planning your canvas, right? It doesn't matter so much that this pole has a 5% different outline than it did last time. If we're planning our canvas, we're probably going to be looking at performance in past elections and ranking polls in some way. So then what we would want is a simple concordance. Go here, go there, right? If you went here, if you went to 100, now you want to go to 102 or whatever that is. So that's what this script does, okay? And then PD analysis is almost the same. So let's walk through this one though. So we open the GeoJSON file and then we reproject it to that UTM-17N, okay? And we're doing that because for the same reason that I talked about earlier. This is a more accurate map projection for the purpose of calculating area than WGS84. So we reproject it, then we basically just loop through we do a nested loop so that everything gets compared to everything. We calculate the intersection of every pole in one file against every pole in the other file. And if there is an overlap, then we calculate the intersection area and what percentage of the overall geometry of the original pole it was. There's a little bit of code in there for cleanup. Okay, that if we have a 0.5 and a 99.5, let's not do that math. Let's call that 101 because I'm also very skeptical of a less than 1% change in area because I think that probably means that there is a math problem or there's some small variance in the data rather than there actually being a meaningful change in the geography. So that's just my guesstimate, but I think the results work quite well. And then what we do is we just emit a CSV with each of those two polling division numbers and the percent at which the second poll overlaps the first, which is all you need. That mapping and percentage is then what you need to be able to apply to the results in this 2021 so that you compare them apples to apples with 2015 in this case. So I tried to make this as simple as possible. It covers only one case. Obviously, if you want to do this, for a larger project, rather than one riding or one single election campaign, you're probably going to want to consider how you can automate this and what that might look like in your use case. But hopefully, this script will get you started. So let's just give it a try. I should add too, just before we get to that I've already put together the data files for 2015, 2019, and 2021 for Windsor West. I believe those are in the repository as well, so that there is something that you can demo quickly. Okay, so hardest part of this is remembering where I keep my source code. Okay. Force try. Okay. Great. All right. And so to create a Docker image, we want to go Docker build, and then we will name it PD concordance. There we go. So if you're not familiar with containers, what we're doing now is we built the image, okay, and in order to now actually create a container, we need to run that image, okay, and we can call it by name, and my Docker file terminates at a bash prompt. So when this runs, what we should get, here we go, is a prompt in the app. And there is our GeoJSON files, and there are our scripts. And just to quickly remind you, this script actually has the data files hard coded. You'll want to change that if you're working with this. So we can just run the script. And it's done. And now we have the data file PD overlap. So there you go. So what you're looking at there is probably not a very exciting representation, but what you're looking at there is the 2015 poll separated by a comma from the 2021 poll, and then the degree of overlap. And so you can see just looking at this data, can I quickly zoom this in a bit? How do you do that? That doesn't look good. If you look at the overlaps, you can see that the geography doesn't really change that much. We're looking at 1%, 1.5%, 2%, very small variations in geography, which is why I think that especially when you're talking about planning for a campaign or reasoning about one particular campaign, it's probably okay to use the simpler concordance method and just be, what's the poll that corresponds to this poll. But this is the more fine-grained way to do it, and then you can take those percentages and apply them to the 2021, in this case, election results to understand how much of that 2015, I'm sorry, how much of that result would apply to the corresponding 2015 poll. Got it. Okay. So that is that, and I believe that is everything that I had to show you. So let's stop sharing the screen.
Just a question.
Please.
Is the demographic data, the Census Canada data, available by polling divisions?
No, great question. It's not. So census geography is different.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to see everybody. Where is everybody? There we go. It's funny, finding a small button on your user interface, the more people that are watching you try to find it, the longer it takes. Sorry, what was your question?
My question was, is the demographic StatCan data?
Yeah. So actually, Fraser, you want to jump on and talk to us a little bit about the geography of Statistics Canada data? I know you know it better than I do, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so it doesn't come pre-populated at those geographies, but you could run a transformation to aggregate it to those geographies. So you probably have to work from either a census dissemination area, which is actually pretty close to a poll. Doug, if you were to just throw the Windsor West poll map up, like it's kind of close. I would say a poll might be because the primary difference though is that polls tend to, as I understand it, account for residential geographies to a degree. Like they capture a park, they capture things like that, and because it's like a neighborhood, whereas census is really just about the people that live there. And so you end up with like these geographies in StatCan data where there's like almost no people in it because it's like, the Windsor Assembly Plant, that sort of thing. That would be chopped up into a poll, uh, and lumped in with a neighboring poll, generally speaking. So you could probably get a close approximation, and you could probably get approximations at a riding level pretty easily, like rolling it up to a riding level and knowing like, okay, the percentage of households who are newcomers or those sort of things. And that is available. Riding level data is pre-populated and available from StatCan based on federal ridings, not provincial.
Thanks, buddy. I knew you could answer that question better than I could. So this same technique that I demonstrated, though, it works for different geographic representations. So if you want to compare or you want to aggregate Statistics Canada data into election geographies, you can use that same technique. I've done that before. It works pretty well.
Okay.
So either, as Fraser says, you grab the data at the riding level, or you use the approach that I used in the provincial one, which will work for the Ontario polls, where you can sort of lump those DAs, dissemination areas, you lump them together and aggregate them to kind of, everything that intersects with this poll is now in this poll.
Okay.
But that doesn't work so well with federal polls because they're smaller. As Fraser says, they're roughly the same size as dissemination areas, but different geography. So if you've got a DA that half overlaps a poll, you're doing a lot of violence if you're like, this is the same thing, right? So in that case, when you use that same approach of the area calculation, you don't get 2 and 3% variance, you get huge variances. And then I think that the technique is pretty useful in that case too. So that's what I'd recommend.
Just a wild thought, like realtor.ca has scorecards of neighborhoods, demographics, stuff, and then you can scrape that data by postal code because you can actually put in postal codes and you can get it. Any thoughts? Anybody has ever looked at it?
I don't know. It's probably something that you could do, and it sounds like a really interesting project. I'm always up for scraping data from websites. But the challenge that I would give you back is that realtor data is downstream of a bunch of data sets. Like it is itself an aggregation of a bunch of different data. And what I would rather do is understand how they're deriving that information, and then, right, apply that, get those data sets, right? One thing that I would say to that is that realtor.ca almost certainly uses the Environics data.
Mhm.
So I would use the Environics data in preference to like realtor.ca, just because we don't know. I'm sure that realtor.ca has wonderful statisticians. If you guys are watching, you rule. But I don't know for sure. But I think we can feel pretty confident that Environics is
Environics is behind a paywall, right?
It is behind a paywall at a level of aggregation more detailed than the postal code.
Okay.
But you can, if you're talking web scraping, you could scrape the Environics analytics site in much the same way by postal code, and it actually might be a little simpler because you plain and simple prompt it with a postal code and get the data back. But I do have to say I have no idea what their terms of service would say about that. And they probably don't want us doing that, but you in theory could.
Good, right? Because the whole idea is because StatCan data is like every 2 years it's already dated, right? Maybe 3 years.
It's true that the census only happens, I want to say every 5 years. But I don't know that there's no other data set that compares how comprehensive it is. And then those data sets like Environics, they're using the census data as their backbone. right? So they may be supplementing it. And again, Fraser is the StatsCan guy on the call. Like there are a lot of other data sets they might be using. Like Fraser, could you use tax filer data to supplement the census? Just thinking of something that's more frequent,
Yeah.
right?
Like Environics uses their own polling too, right? Like they're doing constant market research, and that's how they really build out their stuff is they're doing like weekly polls, and they're capturing, the 3-digit postal code, and every time someone completes a poll for them, it feeds like I don't know if you've looked at like the Environics data in detail, but they know like what kind of car you're most likely to drive, what's your favorite TV show, stuff like that. They've asked that data across the country through massive sample polls. And then they, just like the polling aggregators, they use sort of demographic profiles to then estimate, what's going on in a specific postal code based on income, type of house, all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah, it is pretty interesting data, and at the level of the individual, at least when I've interacted with it, the general process is that you send your list to Environics, and then they append to your list. So I don't know if you send them additional data beyond just the pure identifiers. I don't know if they then take that into account to influence the demographic data. You would have to talk to the Environics sales department, but yeah, you give them your list, and then you get your list back all marked up with all kinds of extra info and stuff like what kind of car you probably drive, which is pretty wild. Okay, so any other questions before we break?
I have
Okay.
a random question about the precision of GIS data. So I was thinking, if the world is 40,000 kilometers and Windsor, you have details down to like a meter, like that's like less than 1 in a million. So it's like, is there a chance that when you're doing this projection to that projection transformation, things are off by a meter, or how
So
fine can you get?
So I'm not too worried about it for the purposes of like a demo like today. But I worked on a project where we did have to look at that because it's not just when you reproject, it's any kind of transformation. When you convert data from one format to another, you have to worry about that as well, right? So in our use case, we were moving data from shape files into WKB. So well-known binary. Because there are two formats, WKT, well-known text, and WKB, well-known binary. Those are the formats that you need to use to load SQL Server with geography data, at least unless that's changed since I did it in 2021. Yeah, I had never heard of it before I had to load SQL Server with this data. Those files, when you load those files, sometimes you find out that the two systems that you're working with have a different opinion of the protocol or the format. So I'm talking about WKB and WKT specifically because when we export from QGIS, QGIS doesn't care if it's describing the points in a counterclockwise direction or a clockwise direction, but SQL Server absolutely cares and will throw away, I believe it's counterclockwise. If your data is defined counterclockwise, SQL doesn't want it. And so that's just an example. Like when you get under the hood, this is not like, this is not if it says A, translate that to B. It's not ROT 13, right? Like there's work that has to be done here. And sometimes that work can screw up, and sometimes even the implementation of the driver for the data format is different. So you definitely need to check your work when you're doing, like the first time you're doing something like that, you should check to see what the quality of that conversion is going to be. Like it's worth doing. Yeah, for sure. Like convert it back, and do they still look one-to-one when you overlay them? Right? That's one way to make sure that it looks good.
I figure. I know in manufacturing it's like a major issue, like it's a daily concern for manufacturers who get data from other systems.
Yeah. Oh yeah, you get somebody else's CAD data, and then yeah.
It's like these two surfaces that are supposed to meet exactly, they don't meet exactly. They're not even the same direction where they're meeting, and it's like, okay, how exactly are you supposed to correct it without violating the customer's requirement of
Right.
what they wanted?
Right. And that's that, yeah. So that's a good example of where it's valuable to verify against the original data file that you still got the same thing. Okay, so thank you everybody for listening and being here today. I hope that was enlightening. You either attended in person or you attended online Windsor Hackforge event. Windsor Hackforge is a not-for-profit operating in Windsor, Ontario, and we are organized into interest groups. This interest group is Border City Data. We get together every month or so and talk about techniques and tools in the world of data. You may be interested in something else. I would encourage you to check out the Hackforge website at hackf.org to see what different interest groups are available. And if the interest group that you're interested in is not available, you are also allowed to start interest groups at Hackforge as a member of the public. So I encourage everyone to consider that and to keep coming back. I've seen many of these faces and names I've seen before at Border City Data events, and we really appreciate that. So thanks again, everybody, and have a good night.